Tuesday morning in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window. I opened the mail, unsuspecting. Among the usual bills and flyers, a cream-colored envelope from Trevor's insurance company caught my eye odd. I murmured to myself, picking it up. Trevor had always handled his own finances, rarely involving me. Inside, a thick document detailed a life insurance policy, a $2 million policy with Trevor listed as the beneficiary. My name, however, was printed clearly as the insured. $2 million. On my life, my breath caught in my throat. Trevor, I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. My own son. He'd taken out a $2 million policy on my life. The phone rang, jarring me from my stunned silence. It was Celeste, Trevor's fiancée. Her chirpy voice grated on my nerves. "Blanch, darling, how are you?" I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice even. "Celeste, fine, thank you. And you, wonderful. We're just finalizing the guest list for the wedding. Julian and I were hoping you could confirm your attendance. You wouldn't miss it, would you?" she asked, her tone saccharine. I hesitated. How could I face them after this? "Of course, dear. Wouldn't miss it for the world," I managed, my stomach twisting. The policy lay on the counter, a stark white rectangle against the checkered tablecloth. $2 million. It was a staggering amount, more money than I'd ever seen in my lifetime. And Trevor, my own son, stood to gain it a loop in my death. My hand trembled as I reached for a cup of coffee, the ceramic cold against my palm. The image of Trevor, a sweet, freckled boy with a gap-toothed grin, flashed in my mind. Where had that boy gone? What had turned him into this calculating man? I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, moving mechanically through my routine. The insurance policy remained on the counter, a silent accusation. Each time my gaze fell upon it, a fresh wave of hurt washed over me. I thought of the sacrifices I had made for Trevor, the long hours I worked to provide for him, the dreams I'd deferred so he could pursue his own. And this cold, calculated act was how he repaid me. Later that afternoon, Trevor called. "Mom, Celeste said you confirmed for the wedding. That's fantastic." His voice was overly cheerful, almost manic. "We're so excited to have you there." "Trevor," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about the insurance policy." A beat of silence hung in the air. "Policy? What policy?" he asked, his voice suddenly flat. "The $2 million life insurance policy," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "The one you took out on my life." Another silence, longer this time. Then a sigh. "Oh, that, look, Mom, it's just a precaution. For Celeste and me. You never know what could happen." "A precaution?" I laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. $2 million. That's not a precaution, Trevor. That's an investment. He tried to interrupt, to explain, but I cut him off. "Don't, Justin. I'll see you at the wedding." I hung up, my hands shaking. The afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my kitchen. The insurance policy still lay on the counter, now bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. It seemed to gleam, almost mockingly. $2 million. It was a lot of money, enough to change a life, enough to start a new one. A slow smile spread across my face. Perhaps, I thought, This wasn't a betrayal. Perhaps it was an opportunity to finally take care of myself, to secure my own future. The wedding, the expensive resort, the lavish gifts, it all seemed to shimmer with a new, enticing light. They wanted a show. They would get one. And I, Blanch Hoffman, would be the star. Rain lashed against the farmhouse windows, mirroring the tempest brewing inside me. I remember Celeste's shrill voice, sharp as shattered glass, echoing in my ears. "You're nothing but a burden, Blanche. A relic of the past." That's how it started. The slow, insidious chipping away at everything I held dear. This old farmhouse, the very heart of our family history, became a battleground. I could almost smell the freshly baked bread, the scent clinging to the worn wooden floors, a ghost of happier times when Trevor was just a boy, his small hand gripping mine as we walked the fields. He loved those walks, loved the feel of the earth beneath his boots, just like his father before him. "Mama," he'd say, his voice full of wonder, "can we plant sunflowers here, big, tall ones that reach the sky?" And I, always wanting to nurture his dreams, would smile and say, "Of course, my love, we'll plant a whole field of them." We did too. Rows and rows of sunshine yellow, their faces turned towards the light, a testament to the simple joys we shared. Trevor helped me with everything, feeding the chickens, mending fences, even learning the intricacies of the grain elevator business that had been in our family for generations. "This is all yours someday, son," I'd tell him, pride swelling in my chest. A legacy built on hard work and honesty. He'd beam, his eyes sparkling with ambition, and promised to make me proud. I taught him everything I knew, shared every secret of the land, every nuance of the business. He soaked it all up like a sponge. "I'll make this farm the best in the county, Mama," he declared, his voice ringing with youthful confidence. And I believed him. I poured my heart and soul into that boy, into that farm, into building a future for him, a future I thought we'd share. "I want you to have everything I never had, Trevor," I told him countless times. I wanted him to have the opportunities I missed, the security I craved. I worked my fingers to the bone, scrimping and saving, expanding the farm, acquiring rental properties, ensuring he'd never want for anything. I even fought tooth and nail to protect his inheritance when my own father passed away, shielding him from the grasping hands of relatives who saw him as nothing more than a dollar sign. "This is for you, Trevor," I said, handing him the check. "A foundation for your future." He hugged me tight, whispering his thanks, and I felt a warmth spread through me, the kind of love that only a mother can know. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The ambition I nurtured, the security I provided, it all twisted into something ugly. The arrival of Celeste, with her expensive tastes and condescending air, marked the beginning of the end. "This place is quaint," she'd sneer, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "Hardly befitting Julian's status, is it?" Julian, her fiancé, a man who seemed to exist solely to validate her inflated sense of self-importance. They started whispering in Trevor's ear, poisoning his mind against me, filling his head with dreams of grandeur that had nothing to do with the simple life we had built together. "You deserve more, Trevor," Celeste would purr, her eyes glinting with avarice. You're destined for bigger things than this dusty old farm. And slowly, insidiously, he started to believe her. He began to distance himself, his eyes holding a coldness I'd never seen before. He stopped joining me for our walks, stopped asking for my advice, stopped calling me Mama. The sunflowers, once symbols of our shared joy, wilted under the weight of his neglect. The rain outside intensified, the wind howling like a mournful spirit. I closed my eyes. The image of Trevor's face, twisted in anger, burned into my memory. You're holding me back. He'd spat, his voice dripping with resentment. I need to break free from this prison. The farm, the place where he'd spent his happiest days, the legacy I'd poured my life into, reduced to a prison. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The wind knocked out of me. I stumbled back, clutching the kitchen counter for support, the world tilting on its axis. Everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, it was all for nothing. He didn't want my legacy. He didn't want me. The rain continued to fall, a relentless torrent washing away the remnants of my dreams. And in the silence of that storm-ravaged farmhouse, a quiet resolve began to take root, a seed of something cold and hard planted deep within my heart. I would not be broken. I would not be erased. I would find a way to reclaim what was mine. I would have my revenge. Rain lashed against the windows of the Greyhound bus, blurring the lights of Cedar Springs, Tennessee, into streaks of yellow and red. I clutched my worn purse, the chill seeping through my thin coat. Trevor's words echoed in my head. You're embarrassing, Mom. Just disappear. Let us enjoy our engagement party. Disappear. After everything I'd done for him. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump of grief. It wasn't just the party, of course. It was everything leading up to it. Years of quiet sacrifices I'd made, now seemingly erased in a single dismissive wave of Julian's hand. Celeste, too, her eyes cold, agreeing with Julian's assessment. My own daughter-in-law to be. I looked out at the passing scenery, the familiar streets of my hometown, a place I thought I'd never have to return to. I had plans, dreams for myself after Trevor settled. Now, those dreams seemed to be dissolving like the raindrops on the window. I remembered the day Trevor was born, small and fragile, fitting perfectly in the crook of my arm. From that moment on, my life revolved around him. Every late-night feeding, every scraped knee kissed, every school play attended, it was all for him. My Trevor, I'd whisper, rocking him to sleep. He was a bright child, always curious, always asking why. I fostered that curiosity, buying him books, taking him to the library, encouraging his thirst for knowledge. When he showed an aptitude for science, I beamed with pride. You can be anything you want to be, Trevor, I'd tell him. A doctor, a scientist, anything. He set his sights high, aiming for a prestigious university out of state. The tuition was astronomical, far beyond my means. I worked double shifts at the diner, my feet aching, my back screaming in protest. I took in sewing, mending clothes for the neighbors, every penny earned going towards Trevor's future. It's worth it, I'd tell myself, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. It's all for Trevor. I sold my little house, the one my own parents had left me, the one filled with childhood memories. I moved into a cramped apartment, barely big enough for the two of us, but it didn't matter. It's an investment in your future, I told Trevor, trying to make it sound like an adventure. He just nodded, engrossed in his textbooks, seemingly oblivious to the sacrifices I was making. I remember the Christmas he got accepted to his dream university. He'd opened the acceptance letter, a small smile playing on his lips. "I got in, Mom," he'd said, his voice quiet. I whooped with joy, hugging him tight, tears streaming down my face. "I knew you could do it, Trevor," I cried. He'd hug me back, a rare display of affection. That Christmas, I bought him a new laptop, even though it meant I'd be eating ramen noodles for the next few months. "You need this for your studies," I told him, handing him the gift wrap box. He'd mumbled a thank you, his eyes already glued to the shiny new device. Throughout his college years, I sent him care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. I called him every Sunday, just to hear his voice, to make sure he was okay. He rarely called back. "He's busy with his studies," I'd tell myself, my heart aching with a quiet loneliness. He graduated with honors, landing a coveted internship at a prestigious research firm. I was so proud, bursting with a mother's joy. "See, Trevor," I'd said on the phone, "all that hard work paid off." He'd simply replied, "Yeah, it did." Then came Celeste, beautiful and sophisticated, from a wealthy family. She swept into Trevor's life like a whirlwind, and he was instantly smitten. I tried to be welcoming, to embrace her as the woman my son loved. I hosted dinners, invited them over for holidays, trying to create a sense of family. But Celeste was distant, polite, but distant. She'd make polite conversation, but there was a coolness in her eyes, a subtle disdain that I couldn't quite decipher. Julian, her brother, was even worse, arrogant and condescending. He treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own son's life. The engagement party was the final blow, held at Celeste's family's sprawling estate. It was a lavish affair, filled with people I didn't know, people who looked at me with barely veiled amusement. I felt out of place, like a stray cat at a dog show. My dress, a simple but elegant one I'd saved up for, paled in comparison to the designer gowns the other guests wore. I tried to make conversation, but I was met with blank stares and polite dismissals. Then came Julian's comment, a cruel whisper meant for Celeste but loud enough for me to hear. "Your mother-in-law, really? Couldn't she have stayed home?" Celeste had giggled, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. And then Trevor, my Trevor, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had sided with them. He'd taken me aside, his face etched with embarrassment. "Mom," he'd said, his voice low, "you're embarrassing me. Just disappear. Let us enjoy our engagement party." The bus lurched to a stop, jolting me back to the present. Cedar Springs. I stepped off the bus, the rain still falling, washing away the last vestiges of my hope. I had nowhere to go, no money, no plan. All I had left was a deep, gnawing emptiness and a quiet, simmering anger. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to disappear. Not yet. There was something I needed to do first. Something involving a safety deposit box, a certain life insurance policy. and a plan that was starting to form in the back of my mind. Rain lashed against the window of the Nashville diner, blurring the neon signs across the street. Trevor, my Trevor, always had a knack for business. Even as a boy, he'd set up lemonade stands with meticulously drawn price lists, negotiating discounts for bulk purchases. He'd gone on to get his MBA, landed a prestigious job at a finance firm, and within a few years, he was climbing the corporate ladder, his star on a meteoric rise. He'd met Celeste at a company gala, a radiant woman with an easy laugh and a seemingly gentle nature. They were a dazzling pair, and I truly believed he'd found his perfect match. "Mom," he'd told me, his voice full of that infectious enthusiasm I knew so well, "Celeste is the one. I know it." And I, blinded by a mother's love and pride, readily agreed. Their wedding was a grand affair, held at a sprawling estate just outside of Nashville. The champagne flowed freely, the music swirled around us, and everyone seemed to be caught up in the magic of their union. I remember Celeste's father, a man of quiet dignity, pulling me aside. "Trevor is a good man, Blanche," he'd said, his hand resting on my arm. "Take care of him for us." I'd smiled, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "He's my son," I replied. "I always will." Looking back now, the irony of that moment stings. How could I have known the depths of deception lurking beneath the surface of their perfect love story? They bought a beautiful house in a quiet, leafy suburb, a testament to Trevor's burgeoning success. I'd visit often, bringing homemade cookies or a casserole, eager to be a part of their lives. Celeste always greeted me with a warm hug and a bright smile. "It's so lovely to see you, Blanche," she'd say, ushering me inside. "Julian will be thrilled you're here." Julian, Celeste's younger brother, often stayed with them, a charming young man who seemed genuinely fond of Trevor. They'd spend hours discussing business ventures and investment strategies, their conversations filled with the jargon of high finance, most of which went over my head. But I was happy for them, happy that Trevor had found a partner who shared his ambition and drive. Christmases were always particularly special. We'd gather at their home, the air filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. I'd spend weeks planning the perfect gifts, carefully selecting items I knew they'd cherish. One year, I'd found a beautiful antique pocket watch for Trevor, engraved with his initials. He'd seemed genuinely touched by the gesture, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. "This is amazing, Mom," he'd said, pulling me into a tight hug. "Thank you." Celeste, too, seemed to appreciate my efforts, showering me with compliments and heartfelt thank yous. "You're the best mother-in-law a girl could ask for," she'd say, her words ringing with sincerity. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. It was easier than facing the creeping unease that had begun to settle in my heart. The first cracks in the facade appeared subtly, like hairline fractures in a seemingly perfect piece of porcelain. Trevor started spending more and more time at the office, often missing family dinners and holidays. "Work's been crazy lately," he'd explain, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Big deal coming up. Can't miss this one." Celeste, too, became increasingly distant, her once frequent phone calls dwindling to a minimum. When I did manage to reach her, she was always busy, rushing off to meetings or social events. Things are just so hectic right now, Blanche, she'd say apologetically. But we'll catch up soon, I promise. The promises, however, remained unfulfilled. Weeks turned into months, and the chasm between us grew wider. I tried to rationalize their behavior, telling myself they were simply caught up in the whirlwind of their busy lives. But deep down, a nagging suspicion began to grow, a seed of doubt that refused to be silenced. It was a small thing, really, that finally brought my suspicions to the surface. A misplaced document, a carelessly worded email, a fleeting conversation overheard between Celeste and Julian. The pieces began to fall into place, revealing a picture far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The warmth I'd felt, the love I'd so readily given, seemed to evaporate, leaving me with a chilling sense of emptiness. The rain outside intensified, mirroring the storm raging within me. I stared at the swirling coffee in my mug, the bitter taste a grim reflection of the betrayal I now knew to be true. How could my own son, the boy I'd raised and loved, deceive me so completely? The question echoed in the silence of the diner, a haunting refrain to the melody of heartbreak. Rain lashed against the farmhouse windows, a stark contrast to the twinkling Christmas lights strung across the porch. This time last year, the house had been filled with laughter. Trevor and Celeste had been here, their faces glowing in the firelight. Celeste, ever the picture of domestic bliss, had baked a gingerbread house, its sugary roof glistening under the tree. "Mom, you've really outdone yourself this year," Trevor had said, his arm around my shoulder. "This is the best Christmas ever," Celeste had chimed in. "It really is magical." Blanche, I'd beamed, my heart swelling with a mother's pride. I'd spent weeks preparing, wanting everything to be perfect for them. I'd even redecorated the guest room, adding a plush new rug and a set of antique porcelain dolls Celeste had admired at an auction. Anything for my children, I'd told them, dismissing their protests. Now, the porcelain dolls stared blankly from the shelf, their painted smiles mocking the emptiness that echoed through the house. The gingerbread house, long since stale, sat discarded in the pantry, a crumbling monument to a Christmas that felt like a lifetime ago. I picked up a framed photograph from the mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the outline of Trevor's face. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners, the same way his father used to. "Oh, Trevor," I whispered, my voice cracking. "What happened to us?" The rain outside intensified, mirroring the storm raging inside me. I wandered into the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and pine still lingering faintly in the air. The Christmas tree, once vibrant and full, now stood drooping, its needles scattered across the hardwood floor. I hadn't had the heart to take it down. Each ornament, each twinkling light, was a painful reminder of a happier time, a time before the life insurance policy, before the betrayal, before the chasm had opened between my son and me. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste a stark contrast to the sweetness of the memories. I remembered Trevor as a little boy, his small hand gripping mine as we walked through the fields. "Mommy, I want to be a farmer just like you," he'd said, his voice full of earnest determination. I'd smiled, picturing him taking over the farm one day, carrying on the legacy my own father had built. "You can be anything you want to be, my love," I'd told him, kissing the top of his head. Now, that dream felt like a distant echo, swallowed by the silence of the empty house. The farm, once a symbol of family and tradition, now felt like a burden, a constant reminder of what I had lost. I ran my hand over the smooth surface of the kitchen table, the wood-worn smooth buyers of family meals, laughter, and whispered secrets. The ghost of Christmases past lingered in every corner, whispering tales of joy and togetherness. I could almost hear the clatter of dishes, the excited chatter of children, the warm rumble of my husband's laughter. "This is what Christmas is all about," he would say, raising his glass in a toast. Family. Now, the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain against the windows, a mournful soundtrack to my solitude. I sank into a chair, the weight of my grief pressing down on me like a physical force. I had poured my heart and soul into this farm, into this family, and for what? To be cast aside, deemed unworthy, a mere obstacle in their pursuit of wealth and status. The thought stung, a fresh wave of bitterness washing over me. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure a vision of the future, but all I could see was a bleak, an empty landscape. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I stared at it, hesitant to answer. It could be Trevor or Celeste, their voices dripping with false concern, their words carefully crafted to maintain the illusion of caring. I let it ring, the sound echoing through the empty house. Finally, it stopped, leaving a silence even deeper than before. I picked up a stray ornament from the table, a delicate glass snowflake. It glittered in the dim light, a fragile reminder of the beauty that had once filled this house. I held it up to the window, watching the rain stream down the glass. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, a testament to the quiet resolve that was beginning to stir within me. I would not let this break me. I would not let them win. I would find a way to rebuild my life, to find happiness again, even if it meant walking away from everything I had ever known. The faintest glimmer of a plan, a flicker of hope, began to take shape in the darkness of my despair. This Christmas might be lost, but the future was still unwritten. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I remembered the day Trevor brought Celeste home for the first time. "Mom," he'd said, a nervous tremor in his voice. "This is Celeste." She'd offered a thin smile, her eyes flitting around the room, taking in the antique furniture, the family portraits. "It's charming," she'd murmured, a word that somehow felt less like a compliment and more like a veiled criticism. Dinner that night was strained. Celeste picked at her food, barely touching the roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing. "I'm mostly vegan," she'd announced, as if my carefully planned meal were a personal affront. Julian, Celeste's fiancé, at least tried to make conversation, but his attempts felt forced, his eyes constantly darting back to Celeste, seeking approval. I tried to be welcoming, to see the good in her, the woman my son loved. I asked about her family, her work, her interests. Her answers were curt, dismissive. "My family's complicated," she'd said vaguely, offering nothing more. "I'm an influencer," she'd added, a slight curl to her lip, as if that explained everything. And as for interests, well, those seemed to revolve entirely around social media and building her brand. The engagement came a few months later. Trevor called, his voice bubbling with excitement. "We're getting married, Mom," he'd exclaimed. Celeste said yes. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "That's wonderful, dear," I replied, trying to inject genuine warmth into my voice. "When's the big day?" He told me they were planning a lavish Christmas wedding at a luxury resort. My heart sank. Christmas had always been a special time for our family, filled with cozy traditions and homemade meals. This felt different. I tried to push my reservations aside. After all, it was Trevor's happiness that mattered. I offered to help with the wedding planning, wanting to be involved, to bridge the widening gap between Celeste and me. "Oh, that's sweet of you, Blanche," Celeste had purred. "But we have a wedding planner. She's taking care of everything." Her tone implied that my help wasn't needed, wasn't wanted. It was a subtle but stinging rejection. I offered to contribute financially, hoping that might smooth things over. Again, Celeste declined, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Julian's family is taking care of everything," she said, her eyes gleaming with a barely concealed triumph. The wedding itself was a spectacle, a carefully curated performance for social media. Celeste, in a designer gown, posed endlessly for photos, her smile fixed and unnatural. Julian, handsome in his tailored suit, seemed almost a prop in her carefully constructed narrative. Trevor, my sweet, kind Trevor, looked lost amidst the glitz and glamour, a forced smile plastered on his face. He barely spoke to me, his attention constantly drawn back to Celeste and her entourage of online admirers. The reception was even more extravagant. Champagne flowed freely, expensive hors d'oeuvres circulated on silver trays. I sat at a table with distant relatives I barely knew, feeling utterly alone. The speeches were long and self-congratulatory, focusing on Celeste's journey and Julian's family's impressive wealth. No one mentioned Trevor, his achievements, his kindness, the man he was beyond the shadow of his glamorous bride. Later, during the dancing, I managed to catch Trevor alone for a moment. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room before settling back on me. "Of course, Mom," he said, his voice strained. He squeezed my hand, a fleeting moment of connection in the midst of the orchestrated chaos. But the look in his eyes told a different story. It was a look of resignation, of obligation, of a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. That night, as I lay in my hotel room, the echoes of the lavish celebration fading into the quiet hum of the air conditioner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. The extravagance of the wedding, the constant focus on wealth and status, Celeste's dismissive attitude towards me, it all felt calculated. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a nagging suspicion began to grow, a seed of doubt planted deep in my heart. I replayed the events of the past few months, searching for clues, for any hint of what lay beneath the surface of this picture-perfect fairy tale. And as I drifted off to sleep, a single thought echoed in my mind. What if I was missing something? What if there was more to this story than met the eye? The rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm against the glass, a soundtrack to my growing unease. Rain lashed against the farmhouse windows, a rhythmic counterpoint to the laughter spilling from the living room. I surveyed the scene, a warmth spreading through me despite the chill outside. Celeste and Julian, hand in hand, circulated among the guests, their faces radiant. "This punch is delicious." Blanche, Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, gushed. "You've really outdone yourself." I smiled. "Thank you. It's a special recipe." I'd spent weeks planning this engagement party, wanting everything to be perfect for Celeste and Julian. Celeste had initially scoffed at the idea of a farmhouse party, preferring something more sophisticated in the city. "Honestly, Mom," she'd said, her nose wrinkling, "isn't this a bit trustic?" But Julian had charmingly intervened. "I think it's lovely, Celeste. It's authentic." He'd squeezed my hand, flashing me that winning smile of his. "Besides," he'd added, winking, "think of the photo opportunities." And so the farmhouse it was. Fairy lights twinkled, illuminating the family photos adorning the mantelpiece. My late husband, Samuel, smiled down at us from a silver frame. He would have loved this. He'd always adored Celeste, spoiling her rotten from the day she was born. "Everything all right, Blanche?" Julian's voice broke through my thoughts. He'd materialized beside me, his concern evident. "You seem a little distant." I shook my head, offering a reassuring smile. "Just taking it all in, Julian. You to make a beautiful couple." He beamed, his eyes shining with happiness. "We do, don't we, Celeste? Everything to me." He glanced over at her, his gaze lingering. "I can't wait to start our life together." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I want to give her everything, Blanche." "The world," I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. "Everything." That's what Trevor, my son, had said to when he'd married Sally's sister, Amelia, years ago. He'd wanted to give Amelia the world. He'd even taken out a life insurance policy, naming me as the beneficiary, $2 million, a sum that had shocked and confused me when I discovered it. Why such a large amount? Why me? It didn't make sense. Trevor had brushed it off, claiming it was just a precaution. "For the future, Mom," he'd said vaguely, "just in case." But something about his explanation, the way he'd avoided my gaze, had left me uneasy. And now, seeing Julian's almost identical declaration, a cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. The evening progressed, a blur of laughter, music, and well wishes. I watched Celeste and Julian, their performance flawless. They were the picture of a happy couple, deeply in love, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A subtle shift in their eyes when they thought no one was watching. A shared glance that spoke of something more than affection. Something calculated. As the party wound down, guests began to depart, their voices echoing into the rainy night. Celeste and Julian helped me clear away the remnants of the celebration, their movements practiced and efficient. "Thank you, both of you," I said, genuinely touched by their help. "It was a wonderful evening." Celeste smiled, her eyes glittering. "It was perfect, Mom. Just perfect." Julian placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly firm. "We're so grateful for everything, Blanche," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You've welcomed us into your family with open arms." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "We won't forget it." There it was again, that same unsettling tone, that same carefully crafted sincerity. I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "Your family," Julian, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Of course I'd do this for you. As they finally left, arm in arm, disappearing into the rain-swept night, I stood by the window, watching their taillights recede into the darkness. The knot in my stomach hadn't loosened, but something else had begun to stir. A quiet resolve, a plan. I knew I needed to uncover the truth, whatever it may be. I knew I needed to protect myself, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was going to play along. I had a few phone calls to make, a few strings to pull, and a few surprises up my sleeve. This game, whatever it was, had just begun, and I intended to win. The Nashville Country Club shimmered, a mirage of white linen and champagne flutes. I smiled thinly, clutching my small, beaded purse. Such a beautiful venue, Celeste, I said, trying to sound genuine. Celeste, resplendent in her designer gown, barely glanced at me. Yes, well, Julian insisted, she replied, her eyes already scanning the room for more important guests. Julian, his arm possessively round her waist, flashed a practiced smile. Mother Hoffman, so glad you could make it, he said, his tone dripping with a false cordiality that grated on my nerves. I nodded, choosing to focus on the elaborate floral arrangements rather than the simmering resentment within me. The wedding was opulent, extravagant, exactly the kind Celeste had always dreamed of, and, I suspected, exactly the kind Trevor could never afford on his own. I found a quiet corner away from the pre-ceremony buzz, watching the servers glide through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A waiter offered me a miniature quiche. "Thank you," I murmured, taking one. I nibbled at it, my mind racing. The life insurance policy, the $2 million it hung over me like a dark cloud. Trevor had insisted it was a simple investment, a way to secure his future. But the nagging doubt persisted. Why hadn't he told me about it? Why had he named himself the beneficiary? A hand touched my arm. It was Trevor. He looked nervous, his smile strained. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, his voice low, just taking it all in. I replied, forcing a smile. He squeezed my arm. "Celeste is really happy," he said, his eyes pleading for my approval. I nodded slowly. "She certainly seems to be," I said, my gaze drifting towards the lavish decorations. "It's a lot," I added, unable to keep the slight edge out of my voice. Trevor sighed. "I know," he said, "but it's what she wanted." He looked away for a moment, then back at me. "I want her to be happy, Mom." I studied his face, searching for any flicker of guilt, any hint of the deception I suspected. But his expression was earnest, almost desperate. "I know you do, Trevor," I said softly. He gave my arm another squeeze, then excused himself to greet some arriving guests. I watched him go, my heart heavy with a mixture of love and suspicion. I loved my son more than anything in the world, but the secret of the life insurance policy had created a chasm between us, a chasm I wasn't sure how to bridge. The music started, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. I found my seat, my gaze fixed on the elaborate archway where Celeste and Julian would soon exchange vows. Throughout the ceremony, I observed Celeste. She radiated happiness, her eyes sparkling, her smile radiant. Julian, too, seemed genuinely happy. his gaze fixed on Celeste with an intensity that seemed almost possessive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was a layer of artifice beneath the surface of their perfect love story. After the ceremony, the reception began. The champagne flowed freely, the music swelled, and the guests danced and mingled. I sat at my table, mostly alone, nursing a glass of wine. Trevor and Celeste made their rounds, greeting their guests, basking in the congratulations and well wishes. When they reached my table, Celeste gave me a perfunctory hug. "Thank you for coming, Mom," she said, her voice lacking any real warmth. "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice equally cool. Julian patted my shoulder. "Glad you could join us, Mother Hoffman," he said, his tone condescending. I simply nodded, my gaze fixed on the glittering diamond ring on Celeste's finger. As the evening wore on, the opulent celebration continued. The lavish buffet, the open bar, the extravagant decorations, it was all a dizzying display of wealth. I watched Celeste and Julian, the happy couple, surrounded by their friends and family. They looked so perfect, so in love, but the image of the life insurance policy kept flashing in my mind, a stark reminder of the secret that lay beneath the surface of their perfect facade. Later, during the cake cutting, a thought struck me. A small, subtle plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was more about securing my own future, about ensuring that I wouldn't be left with nothing. I finished my wine, a small smile playing on my lips. The evening was far from over, and I had a feeling it was about to get much more interesting. I caught Trevor's eye across the room. He smiled at me, oblivious to the thoughts swirling in my head. I raised my glass in a silent toast. The game, I realized, had just begun. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright in Nashville. Trevor and Celeste had insisted I spend the holiday with them in their new home, a gesture that felt both extravagant and oddly obligatory. "Mom, you have to be here," Celeste had trilled over the phone. "It's our first Christmas as a married couple." Their new home turned out to be a sprawling, Fox-Tuscan monstrosity, complete with a circular driveway and a fountain that gurgled incessantly. Inside, the decorations were just as overdone. Garlands draped over every surface, a tree that brushed the soaring ceiling, and enough twinkling lights to illuminate a small airport. "Isn't it magnificent?" Celeste asked, sweeping her arm across the grand foyer. I managed a tight smile. "It's certainly something." The first few months following their whirlwind wedding had been a blur of curated perfection. Instagram posts showcasing exotic vacations, designer clothes, and intimate dinners with Nashville's elite. Julian, ever the attentive fiancé, showered Celeste with lavish gifts: a diamond tennis bracelet, a vintage Porsche, even a weekend getaway to a private island. "He's just so generous," Celeste would sigh dreamily, carefully positioning the bracelet for maximum sparkle in her selfies. Trevor, seemingly content to bask in the reflected glow of his sister's newfound wealth, had taken a position at Julian's firm, a role he described vaguely as strategic development. "It's all about networking, Mom," he'd explained, waving the hand dismissively, "making connections." I had the unsettling feeling he was making connections with the open bar more often than the boardroom. I tried to focus on the positive aspects, the genuine warmth I occasionally glimpsed beneath the veneer of opulence. Celeste, despite her newfound extravagance, still called me every Sunday. Trevor, though increasingly preoccupied with his sister's social circle, still sent me flowers on my birthday. But the nagging feeling persisted, a quiet hum of unease beneath the surface of their meticulously crafted happiness. It was a feeling I couldn't quite articulate, a sense of something buying off. One evening, while everyone else was preoccupied with some elaborate charades game involving pantomimed opera arias and obscure French philosophers, I wandered into Trevor's study. It was a surprisingly modest room, tucked away at the back of the house. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay on the desk, next to a stack of dog-eared books on financial planning. Maya caught a glimpse of a familiar-looking document peeking out from beneath a pile of papers. It was the life insurance policy, the one Trevor had taken out on me, naming himself as the beneficiary. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The $2 million figure stared back at me, stark and accusing. I sunk into the leather chair, the weight of the deception pressing down on me. All those carefully staged moments of familial bliss, all those extravagant gestures of affection, now felt tainted, calculated. Had they been playing me all along? Were their smiles, their embraces, nothing more than a performance, a meticulously crafted facade designed to keep me in the dark? My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The whirlwind wedding, the sudden influx of wealth, Julian's excessive generosity, Trevor's vague job description, it all pointed to something sinister, something carefully orchestrated. But what and why? The charades game ended, and the sounds of laughter and chatter drifted down the hallway. I quickly replaced the policy beneath the papers, my heart pounding in my chest. I joined them in the living room, forcing a smile onto my face. "Who won?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Celeste, flushed with excitement, threw her arms around Julian. "We did," she exclaimed. Julian guessed existential dread in under 30 seconds. Everyone laughed, and I joined in, the sound hollow and forced. I knew I couldn't confront them yet. I needed proof, concrete evidence of their deception. Over the next few months, I played along, feigning ignorance while subtly gathering information. I listened intently to their conversations, scrutinized their social media posts, and even hired a private investigator to delve into Julian's business dealings. Slowly, painstakingly, the truth began to emerge. Julian wasn't a successful entrepreneur. He was a con artist, a master manipulator who preyed on wealthy families. Celeste, blinded by ambition and greed, had become his willing accomplice, and Trevor, caught in the crosshairs of their elaborate scheme, had been coerced into participating, lured by the promise of a life of luxury and ease. The life insurance policy was the final piece of the puzzle, a morbid insurance policy should their plan go awry. Christmas arrived again, a stark contrast to the previous year's festive celebration. The house was quiet, the decorations sparse. Julian was nowhere to be seen, and Celeste's usual effervescence had been replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Trevor, looking haggard and defeated, avoided my gaze. I knew this was my moment. After dinner, I gathered them in the living room. "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Celeste's eyes darted nervously towards Trevor. who remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. I know about the insurance policy, Trevor. I continued, and I know about Julian's business dealings. The color drained from Celeste's face. Mom, she began, but I cut her off. I also know, I said, holding up a thick file containing the private investigator's report, that Julian has disappeared with all of your money, and that the authorities are looking for him. Celeste burst into tears, while Trevor finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and relief. I had expected anger, recriminations, perhaps even denial, but what I saw instead was something far more profound: regret, and a flicker of the son I had once known, the one before greed and ambition had clouded his judgment. I'm not going to press charges, I said, my voice softening, but I'm also not going to bail you out. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. I paused, then added, but I'm still your mother, and if you need a place to stay, my door is always open. The tears flowed freely now, not tears of self-pity, but of genuine remorse. And in that moment, surrounded by the remnants of their shattered dreams, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this Christmas could mark a new beginning, a chance for us to rebuild what had been lost. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew deep down that we would face it together. The crisp December air nipped at my cheeks as I rocked gently on the porch swing, a steaming mug of hot chocolate warming my hands. It had been a year since that awful Christmas Eve when Celeste had tossed her head and sneered, "Really, Mother, your presence is just cramping our style. Why don't you just stay home next year?" The memory still stung, a dull ache beneath the surface of my newfound peace. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the winter sky in hues of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the gray clouds that had hung over my heart for so long. I took a slow sip of my hot chocolate, letting the sweetness linger on my tongue. This year, Christmas would be different. I hadn't seen or spoken to Celeste or Julian since that Christmas. Not a single phone call, not a card, not even a text message. After the initial shock and hurt had subsided, a quiet resolve had settled within me. I wouldn't let their cruelty define my life. I wouldn't let their greed poison my happiness. Instead, I decided to focus on what truly mattered myself. I sold the old farmhouse. It's time for a change, I told the realtor, a cheerful woman named Patty who reminded me a bit of my younger self. Time to start a new chapter. Patty beamed. I have just the place for you, Blanche. A little condo in Nashville, close to everything. She wasn't wrong. The condo was perfect, a cozy two-bedroom with a balcony overlooking the bustling city. It was a world away from the quiet solitude of the farm, and that's exactly what I needed. I started taking those painting classes I'd always dreamed of. You've got a real talent, Blanche. My instructor, a weary man with a kind smile named Mr. Henderson, told me one afternoon. A real eye for color and composition. His words filled me with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. I joined a book club, made new friends, went to concerts, and explored the city's vibrant art scene. I even learned to line dance at a honky-tonk downtown. Two-step, then grapevine, the instructor called out, and I laughed, surprised by my own agility. Life in Nashville was a whirlwind of new experiences, and I embraced every moment with open arms. One crisp autumn afternoon, while browsing through a local antique shop, I overheard a conversation that made me pause. "Did you hear about Julian?" a woman whispered to her friend. "Lost his job, something about embezzlement." My heart skipped a beat. Julian, embezzlement. It couldn't be, could it? I casually strolled closer, pretending to admire a vintage tea set, while straining to hear more. "And Celeste?" the woman continued, her voice hushed. "She left him. Said she wasn't going down with the ship." I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Pity, perhaps, or maybe just a quiet satisfaction. A few weeks later, Patty, my realtor, called. "Blanche, you won't believe this," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Remember that old farmhouse of yours? Well, it turns out the soil is prime for cultivating a rare type of medicinal herb. Some pharmaceutical company is offering a fortune for it." I couldn't help but chuckle. The farm, the very place Celeste had wanted me to leave. "That's interesting," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Good for whoever owns it now." Patty paused. "Well, that's the thing, Blanche. You still own it. I had put the farm into a trust, a safety net for myself just in case. Celeste and Julian, convinced I was penniless and dependent on them, hadn't bothered to check. They had been so focused on their own greed, so blinded by their desire for my non-existent fortune, that they hadn't even considered the possibility that I might have other assets. This Christmas, I'm back in the farmhouse. It's been renovated, modernized, but it still holds the echoes of a lifetime of memories. The pharmaceutical company had made me a generous offer, enough to ensure my comfort and security for the rest of my days. I'm sitting by the fireplace, a roaring fire chasing away the December chill, sipping on a glass of aged wine. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon fills the air. This Christmas, I'm not alone. My other children, my true family, are here. Laughter fills the room, warm and genuine. This year, Christmas is exactly as it should be. I glance out the window at the snow-covered fields, the land that Celeste had so readily dismissed, the land that had, in the end, provided me with more than she could ever imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me. I raised my glass in a silent toast to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.